Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev. This year at E3, Devolver Digital announced a collection of games they've published, but as is with Devolver, the twist was that they were bootleg versions. Some of the titles included were Hotline Miami, Enter the Gungeon, Downwell, and Luftrausers. Now, on Let's Dev, we've attempted to recreate many games, but I've always wanted to do a collection of them in one single package. And since Devolver beat me to the punch, now seems like a great time to try and make my own Devolver recreation compilation a reality. So the plan is to build a WarioWare style collection of microgames which are inspired bootlegged versions of Devolver Digital games. And to give the project some lore, the main character throughout each micro/minigame will be Devolver's very own Fork Parker. And as far as today goes, we're starting with recreating Hotline Miami, which, given how often we've coded something similar in the past, it's surprising that it's taken us this long. That's the plan, so let's not waste any more time and get to the bootlegging. First, we needed to tie our player's direction to the direction of the mouse. Now, if you've been watching a while, a lot of what I do here today will be very familiar. Again, how it's taken this long to recreate Hotline Miami, I don't know. Anyway, I then set up the attack event, checking for the left click. But before we could work on the code, we needed a few things like a hurtbox sprite and an example weapon. I'm starting with melee, so a bat it is. I gave the weapon object a type variable for identification purposes and returned to the player code, where I promptly put the attack event aside to work on the right click event instead. I gave the player a variable to keep track of which weapon is being used. Then in the weapon code, if the weapon was being used by the weapon would stick to the player's position and copy their direction. I then added a state variable, and in came our old friend the switch function. Again, don't be afraid if you're feeling a sense of deja vu right about now. The default state would allow our weapons to act as normal, but the second state would be used for thrown weapons. This change would occur through a simple user event which switches the states and determines the direction of the thrown weapon, which is based off the player's direction. Moving back to the player code, on the right click, if the player doesn't have a weapon equipped and we are within grabbing distance of a weapon, then the nearest weapon to the player is equipped. But if the player already has a weapon equipped, the throw event is triggered. Next came wall collisions for said thrown weapons. I decided to go with another distance check. If close enough to a wall, the weapon's movement is cancelled. This was a nice start, but we can do much better. So I added a variable speed to the thrown weapon, which would alter depending on the state or collision. I also flipped the weapon's direction on collision to add a bounce effect, something you would expect from a weapon thrown at Mach 5. This resulted in a much more satisfying effect and also better mirrored something you'd see in Hotline Miami. Now that our weapon throwing was working, we needed to make our weapons actually attack. Going back to the player code, I used the same cooldown setup we've used in previous projects. Ignore the hold variable for now, I'll get to that in a bit. First, we needed to set up a hurtbox system for our melee weapons. This hurtbox would exist for only a few frames, and while active, it would attach itself to whatever creates it. I also added a scaling variable so we could determine the size of our hurtbox through code. Back to the player, I added the hurtbox creation code and removed the hold variable because it wasn't time for the hold variable. And yeah, I'd say we were on the right track alright, but we needed a better way to handle the scaling of hurtboxes that was clean and easy to use. So I moved the hurtbox code to a script, adding arguments for the hurtbox's size. This way, everything we need to control the hurtbox is packaged in a nice single bit of code. This ended up working exactly as I'd hoped, and so now it was time for the hold variable. In Hotline Miami, some weapons can be held down for automatic fire, and others are a singular attack that won't repeat until the player clicks again. So instead of coding multiple checks, I use a simple variable to check if the attack button is being held. That's what the hold variable is for, just so we're all on the same page. It's a nifty little trick I discovered by accident. Anyway, with that done, we could focus on implementing weapons. I started by trying to do this through the weapon object itself, realized how much I was overthinking things, and settled for doing it through the player code instead. So much like the fists, if the conditions were met, we would spawn the hurtbox via our script. And as you can see, our hurtbox for the bat is slightly larger than the hurtbox for our fists, which translated just fine when we tested our code. And with that working, before we could call it a day, we had to make sure that our whole hold thing actually worked. So I added another weapon, some kind of automatic gun. I don't know guns. Back in our player code, for our automatic weapon, we'd use the same cooldown system we've used in the past, and completely ignoring the hold variable. And just like that, we had a control system that could tell the difference between repeating attacks and singular attacks. We also had our varying hurt box sizes script working well, and our weapon throwing is also very much on point. All in all, a pretty solid start to our Hotline Miami bootleg. I had originally planned to create some sprites for this project beforehand, but I haven't exactly had much time recently. I do have plans to add some sprites down the line though. But for now, that'll do it for this episode of Let's Dev. So remember that if you like this video or enjoy Let's Dev in general, be sure to hit that like button. If you aren't already subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button and be sure to turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. And as always, be sure to leave your thoughts on our bootleg in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.